Okay, so here we have Dies Irae. The song has just started, so hold on, I'll start it again. Okay, so that's the Dies Irae. You can see it's very solemn. And again, it's just, save me, I'm gonna die. Oh. All right, oops. The Ars Antiqua and Ars Nova, neumes combined with staff lines allowed performers to learn new melodies by reading the pitches rather than needing to hear them. However, earlier neume symbols didn't communicate anything about duration, rhythm. The next stage of innovation, notation, began to address that shortcoming. By the 12th century, the curved and straight lines and dots that characterized the earliest neumes had been replaced by boxy shapes called square notation. A black square with a tail attached to it was a long note, and a brief or in a square without the tail was called a breve. Medieval composers put together longs and brevs in six possible combinations, and these combinations were called the rhythmic modes, and there are the examples there. Six rhythmic nodes showing the square note values and modern equivalents. Armed with these tools, composers enhanced the ability to write interesting and varied music, which later generations would designate as ars antiqua, ancient art. Many of these new notational devices were applied to secular, non sacred music. Moreover, composers working for the Catholic Church still had various tricks up their sleeve. So now we have the rise of polyphony. After the broad scale concept of notation, ninth century composers began to give multiple performers different material to perform at the same time, creating the breakthrough of polyphonic structure. Polyphony is also called counterpoint, and it usually involves simultaneous melodies in different registers. Earliest form of polyphony, parallel organum, was simple and didn't really need to be notated. A composer would take a plain chant melody and add a second line that moved in parallel motion with the original chant, like two synchronized swimmers or divers, but the additional voice was usually a fifth lower. So imagine row, row, row your boat. Although this first format of organum could be improvised, the next stage of its development, oblique organum, required notation. Again, the composer would build from pre-existing chant and add a second organal layer. And this time, though, the voices start in unison and gradually diverge until they reach a perfect interval. The two parts come back together periodically on a unison, kind of like a pair of scissors opening and closing. As composers began devising ways to indicate rhythmic values for each note, it became possible to have two or more voices move in independent rhythms, not just independent pitches. This is labeled free organum. A simple example is shown in 210. Eventually, composers also realized that they didn't have to work from pre-existing plain chant. It was possible for the voices to be newly composed, and information about this early polyphony survived in a surprising document, lecture notes that were scribbled by a medieval student at the University of Paris. No one knows the student's name, so he's referred to as Anonymous 4. There are various medieval documents who have anonymous nicknames. As we learn from Anonymous 4 and other 13th century writers, a world of compositional possibilities had opened up now that notation of pitch and rhythm is feasible. So the next listening example is Sumer es ecumen in. So one of the most ingenious polyphonic compositions was Sumer es ecumen. It was copied into a manuscript kept in the Benedictine Abbey near Reading, England. This anonymous piece contains two layers of musical activity employing six voices. The lower layer is called a rondellus, a polyphonic genre for two or more voices that was popular in the Middle Ages. A rondellus contains at least two melodies, A and B. Melodies are crafted so that when the performer sings A, second performer creates harmony by singing B. And then the performers switch their melodies. So first performer sings B while second sings A. So the rondellus is sometimes called voice exchange. Sing Cuckoo New is a medieval English for sing cuckoo now. It's a celebration of summertime when the cuckoo would sing again. It's possible that this rondellus melody is derived from a chant for the Compline office service called Regina Caeli Laetare. Moreover, within Sumer es ecumen in, this rondellus is performed as an ostinato, the term for a motif that's repeated many, many times, when the two voices keep alternating their motifs. The repetitive rondellus becomes an accompaniment pattern for the four other voices. So the medieval source labels the rondellus as a pes, meaning a foot or ground. The rondellus is the footing or foundation on top of which the other layer is built. And the upper layer in Sumer es ecumen is another type of imitative polyphony called a canon. A synonym for canon is round, which is the way we learn as children to sing songs like Row, Row, Row Your Boat. One group starts the melody, a second group echoes the same melody a little later, but while the first group is still singing. So the English term for a canonic piece in the Middle Ages was rota, And so this piece is often nicknamed the Reading Rota. The text of this rota also celebrates the arrival of summer. And the large plus symbol appears in the medieval score, and it indicates when the first singer reaches that point, the subsequent singer should enter with his or her echo of the melody. When both layers, the rondellus and rota, are combined, a highly elaborate polyphonic piece is created. So the diagram shows the role of each voice as performed, and our performers chose to have the lower pes labeled or voice start alone, with the upper pes waiting 2 measures before entering. Similarly, at the end of the piece, the upper pes stops singing 2 measures before the lower ends. And interestingly, the original manuscript includes a second poem in Latin. The Latin poem begins Perpice Christolica, Behold Christian, and it's a religious text, in contrast to the secular spirit of the Sumer poetry. Some scholars suggest that the sacred poem was added to justify the inclusion of this secular piece of music within a manuscript intended for the church. We'll never know what motivated the unknown scribe to keep a record of this exuberant composition, but it remains a remarkable example of polyphony that's more complex than any surviving work of its time. It would be another century before composers began to surpass the ingenuity of this delightful piece, and we will listen to it in the next section.